All right, good afternoon. Quite a few things for you guys today. This morning, the Secretary General brought together, as he does twice a year, the heads of the UN System Organization in a virtual meeting of the Chief Executive Board. And this meeting is to reflect on current world affairs as they affect and relate to the UN system's work. The board deliberated on salient emerging trends, opportunities, and challenges facing the system. CB members are engaging in a dedicated discussion on how progress and prosperity are currently measured and how to encourage collectively committed complementary metrics to GDP in order to capture human well-being and planetary sustainability, otherwise known as GDP plus. A couple of updates for you from the field on Sudan. Following the recent coup and the wave of protests in Khartoum and other Sudanese cities, we have seen yet again the de facto authorities use excessive force against protesters yesterday, resulting in the deaths of reportedly 15 people so far and an unconfirmed number of injuries. This brings the death toll of peaceful civilian protesters to 37 since the beginning of the protest against the October 25th coup. We strongly condemn this repeated use of excessive force against peaceful demonstrators and renew our call upon the de facto authorities and the security forces to exercise restraint and refrain from committing further human rights violations. Freedom of expression and assembly are fundamental human rights afforded to every Sudanese, and they need to have the opportunity to express themselves peacefully and without fear of retaliation. All those detained as a result of the protests and those held since the October 25th coup must be released. Turning to Afghanistan, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that aid operations continue across the country, with new needs being identified in ongoing interagency assessments. Earlier this week, in an interagency mission to Kandahar, our colleagues assessed the capacity and the needs of a UN-supported health facility. The facility was recorded a significant increase in patients over the last 3 months due to a lack of access to basic health services in other districts. Our colleagues also noted an increase in cases of severe acute malnutrition among children under 5. The mission also visited a UN-supported reception center for returnees that provides cross-border return and reintegration services. Reportedly, more than 3,000 people have returned from Iran to Afghanistan since the border reopened in November. In Herat province, some laboratory services have been halted for the last 3 weeks due to non-payment of staff salaries. Yesterday, another UN mission to Taloqan in Takhar province conducted assessments to help vulnerable households. Takhar province has seen an increase in the number of people requiring assistance, including due to drought. Our humanitarian colleagues also warned that the use of unexploded ordnances across Afghanistan remains a major safety risk. Earlier this week, 2 unexploded ordnances and 1 improvised explosive device detonated on several civilians, including 3 children who were injured in Tirinkot city in Uruzgan province. The flash appeal for Afghanistan, which is seeking $606 million for the last 4 months of this year, is 87% funded, having received $530 million to date, for which we thank all of the donors who converted their pledges to cash. And as you saw yesterday, Deborah Lyons, the head of the UN mission in Afghanistan, briefed the Security Council and you in the afternoon. From Myanmar, our UN team there says that they remain deeply concerned by continuing levels of people displaced internally, as well as by the worsening humanitarian needs due to conflict, political instability, and COVID-19 since the military seized control of the government on February 1st. According to UNHCR, since February 1st, a record high of 234,000 women, children, and men have been newly displaced. This is up from 176,000 people at the end of August, compounding an already dire humanitarian situation in the country. The latest displacement figures comes on top of 370,000 people that have already been displaced before the military takeover. The humanitarian situation in Myanmar continues to deteriorate, with more than 3 million people requiring critical assistance and protection services since start of 2021. We're particularly concerned about increasing food insecurity in Myanmar. To give you an example, the town of Mindat in Chin State has experienced the town in Mindat in Chin State has experienced heavy fighting in recent weeks, with many people fleeing their homes. Our colleagues say that food for displaced people and host communities is running desperately short. Humanitarian access to Mindat has been extremely limited, and aid workers need urgent access to the area to deliver much-needed aid. Humanitarian organizations expect to have reached more than 2 million people with aid by the end of 2021, that is this year. They stand ready to scale up the response, but this requires increased access to the people who actually need our help. The envoys of the Middle East Quartet, and that is the European Union, the Russian Federation, the United States, and us, the United Nations, met in person in Oslo. This followed an important meeting of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee addressing the Palestinian economic situation. The envoys welcomed the steps announced by Israel to reach out to Palestinian Authority and to assist in the fiscal crisis. The envoys remain deeply concerned by developments in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza, including ongoing acts of violence in the West Bank, the advancement of new settlement units, the untenable fiscal crisis within the Palestinian Authority, and threats of violence in Gaza. And that full statement was released. Quick update from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where our UN peacekeeping colleagues are telling us that yesterday they repelled an attack by combatants from the armed group known as Codeco. This took place in Drodro in the Ituri province of the country. The peacekeepers secured a camp for displaced people, the hospital, and the office of an NGO. Staff from the NGO were sheltered in the peacekeepers' temporary base for the night. Our colleagues reiterated their concern about increasing number of attacks by armed combatants in the eastern part of the DRC, especially in the provinces of North Kivu and Ituri. The mission continues to work to protect its civilians, including through stronger presence in areas with ongoing military operations and where the population can be targeted by retaliatory attacks. Quick update from Madagascar, where we, and along with the World Food Programme, have been talking about this famine, the risk of famine. Today, the government and humanitarian partners launched a revised flash appeal that seeks $231 million to provide assistance to 1.3 million people through May of next year. As we've been reporting over the past few months, the climate crisis is having a devastating impact on people's lives in the country, especially in the southern part, known in the French as Grand Sud. For the last 3 years now, consecutive droughts combined with sandstorms and pests have made it nearly impossible for people in this area to grow their own food. We, along with our partners in Madagascar, estimate that 1.3 million people are facing severe hunger and 28,000 people are in famine-like conditions. Humanitarian organizations have significantly expanded their operations this year to provide life-saving assistance to over 900,000 men, women, and children. But with the peak of the lead season fast approaching, that's January to April, more assistance is needed. The humanitarian coordinator for Madagascar, Issa Sonogo, is calling for international community to urgently increase its support. We've already received about $120 million towards the $231 million, but additional funding will enable humanitarian organizations to provide food, water, health services, and life-saving nutrition treatment for people in need. If you look, we're asking for $231 million. Just as a point of comparison, I saw a flat for sale in London for $242 million. So instead of buying an apartment, give to this humanitarian appeal. From the Maldives, the UN team there, led by resident coordinator Catherine Haswell, continues to support the country's health and socioeconomic response to the pandemic. As of November 13th, nearly 80% of people over the age of 18 have been fully vaccinated. More than 90% of children between 12 and 17 have been fully vaccinated. We have been supporting the vaccination rollout, and more than 250,000 doses have been delivered through COVAX, with most of the doses donated by Japan and the US. We thank them. And while the Maldives have managed to keep the number of cases low in the capital, Male, in recent months, a rise in cases have been observed in the outer atolls of the Maldives. And just tomorrow, our guests will be the head of UN Women, the head of UNICEF, and the head of UNDP, and they will be joined by the ambassador of the European Union delegation to the UN, Olaf Skog, UN Women Executive Director and Sima Basu, and Ambassador Skog will be here in the room, while Henrietta Fore of UNICEF and Achim Steiner of UNDP will join us virtually to launch the Spotlight Initiative Impact Report for 2021, Rising to the Challenge. And I think that's it. It's about Spotlight Initiative. It's a very good question. The Spotlight Initiative is fighting, thank you for paying attention, first of all. It's about fighting violence against women. Excuse me, I've done a lot of speaking. I just have a glass of water. James, and then we'll go to Edie.
So first, is there any update on the UN staff detained in either Ethiopia or Yemen?
Yes, on Ethiopia, happy to report that 6 detained UN staff members were released today. 5 staff and 1 dependent remain in custody. Our understanding is that the contract drivers were also released earlier this week. On Yemen, unfortunately, there is no positive developments to report. The 2 staff members remain in custody, and worryingly, we've had absolutely no contact with them, and that is despite our continuous efforts. And I think yesterday I was asked where they were detained. I think Maggie had asked. They were detained in their, they were arrested or taken away while they were at home. Yep.
One more. I've got lots more, but one more for now. There's a lot of concern around the world about a missing Chinese tennis player and questions about the email that she may have sent or may have been fabricated. Is the Secretary General joining all of those who are concerned about the whereabouts of this tennis player and urging for there to be proper proof that she's safe and well?
I don't have any comment on this at this particular moment. Yes, Edie.
Follow up on the Ethiopian releases first. There were 34 truck drivers released earlier this week. Are you saying now that the 36 who were still being held were free today? Or
the head count on the truck drivers is a bit murky, because these are contracted either by us or by UN agencies. So my understanding is that all of the 70 plus that we had spoken about earlier this week were released, and these were drivers contracted by us and the World Food Program.
Okay, and do you know what's happened to them? Are they back at their trucks?
I don't know. I would hope they're back at their trucks, but unfortunately, we're very glad they were released. Unfortunately, the trucks are still not moving in a way in a direction we would like them to see move.
And are the 5 staff and 1 dependent still being detained in Addis?
That's my understanding.
Okay, my question is a follow-up on Sudan. Can you tell us what Mr. Perthis is doing and whether there have been any meetings, any fresh attempts to try and get Prime Minister Hamdok released?
We continue. Mr. Pertz continues to be in touch with all the relevant parties in Sudan. It is not so much as a fresh attempt as a continuous attempt to get him and all of the other detainees released. And that has been his work and the Secretary General's work since the beginning. Mr. Klein.
One follow-up and then one substantive question. And the follow-up is those staff members who were released in Ethiopia, are there plans to get them out of the country so they won't be subjected to potentially another detention?
I'm not aware of any plan to relocate them.
Okay, and then my regular question is...
Your regular question?
My regular question. That was a follow-up.
Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Beasley has provided to Mr. Musk kind of a blueprint on how the $6 billion that he asked to be contributed to help alleviate world hunger, would be spent, and he promised transparency and so forth. My understanding is that Mr. Musk has not responded to that yet, but has the Secretary General reached out, or is he considering reaching out directly to back up these calls for multi-billionaires like Mr. Musk and others to contribute a portion of their wealth to helping end hunger? And is the UN concerned about what some are saying could be that the UN is being used for lack of a better term, blue washing?
Look, the Secretary General has been extremely concerned about growing inequality in this world, right? And we all should be. It's not healthy for the planet. It's not healthy for people. The Secretary General is not involved in the discussions between Mr. Musk and Mr. Beasley. That is going on with the World Food Program. We are continuously underfunded for our humanitarian appeals. And we're not, in the greatest scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. I mean, I just said, we need 240 million for Madagascar. There are apartments for sale for that kind of money. We're calling for people to do the right thing, right? To help people in southern Madagascar who are suffering from a climate-induced crisis for which, by all measures, they have no responsibility in. We're just asking for a little humanity. Madame.
Can or will the UN take action against the people who arrested the staff member?
Look,
What can the UN do?
I mean, I think you can answer that question from yourself. I mean, listen, we are working in, just to name two countries, Ethiopia and Yemen, under, frankly, as we do in every country, under protection of the government. It is their responsibility to also ensure the safety of UN staff. Colleagues have been detained without any explanation given to us. They have been released in Ethiopia. We very much welcome that. We continue to be engaged with the government in Ethiopia and Addis. We continue to be engaged with the authorities in Yemen who are detaining our colleagues to first and foremost get them released.
But is it the sign that those governments don't respect the UN anymore?
I think you will answer that question. Celia.
Thank you, Stefan. So Sunday, Venezuela is going to have their elections. The UN sent a technical team, 3 members of the staff. What's the expectation of the Secretary General, especially when a few days before the elections, the government of the United States has questioned the election? Some of the members of the State Department has said that it might be manipulation on the list of the members of voters. Is that a dangerous statement to make before an election like this?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to comment on what others are saying, but what I can tell you is that we very much hope for a free, fair, and transparent election for the sake of the people of Venezuela, so they can help chart their own future.
How important is the presence of the big mission from the European Union and knowing that the Carter Institute have people there?
I think it is always very important in elections to have independent observers who can then render judgment. And we see it all over the world. I think it only brings more credibility to any election when you're willing to have outside observers. Ray, and then Gregory.
Thank you, Stefan. In a press conference this morning, the head of the police in Khartoum, Sudan, said that the protests yesterday were not peaceful and many policemen were injured. You're talking about 89 policemen were injured. Can your mission on the ground confirm these numbers?
No. I mean, it's not numbers that I've been given. Gregory.
Thank you very much. Poland said that yesterday over 200 people penetrate through the border. How can UN estimate the situation in the light of human rights? And are there any plans to discuss such situation in Security Council? Thank you.
That, whether or not it goes up to Security Council is up to members of the Council to do that. Our focus is on the people, right? On the heartbreaking images we've seen of families of men and women and children in the freezing cold in an untenable situation. Our colleagues, both from UNHCR and IOM, are working on both sides, with obviously more focus on the Belarusian side because that's where most of these people are, to try to distribute basic necessities with the support of the Belarusian Red Cross. This is frankly, as we've been saying from the beginning, you know, people should not be used as political bargaining points or bargaining chips. Every one of us who lives here on this planet has a right to dignity and respect to their rights, and we're not seeing that happen. Ibtisam, and then we'll go ahead. Sorry.
Follow up on Ray's question. On Sudan and the issue of demonstrations. I know you said you can't verify these numbers, but your people on the ground, how would they describe the demonstrations in Sudan?
What we saw is excessive use of force by security forces in Khartoum against demonstrators. There's been a military takeover. People are demonstrating. They have a right to demonstrate peacefully. And we're seeing yet again excessive use being used, and yet again people being killed and being injured.
Would you say that the demonstrations in general are also very peaceful? Thank you.
Listen, we're not in every corner on every street in Khartoum. What we have seen for the vast majority are people demonstrating peacefully. And I should also add, you know, members of security forces should not be attacked. But what we've seen is, what I'm told we've seen, a vast majority of it being peaceful. Okay, who's on the screen? Sorry. We'll go to Abdel Hamid and then Michelle.
Thank you, Stefan. Can you explain to me the UN position vis-à-vis the presidential elections in Libya? I am really confused about the UN role. What is the UN role in the forthcoming presidential elections?
It's a very valid question. Are you ready? Okay,
Yes.
Excellent. We're continuing to support the Libyan authorities in preparation for the presidential and parliamentary elections. Our mission in Libya is engaging with all Libyan stakeholders to ensure the organization of timely, credible, and inclusive elections in line with the Libyan political roadmap and relevant Security Council resolutions. What does that mean concretely? Concretely, the UN in Libya has been providing technical support to the High National Elections Commission in several broad areas. First, outreach to decision makers and opinion formers, including technical advice and assistance as requested awareness raising, and support for women and other marginalized groups' participation in the electoral processes. 2, support and advise the electoral operations, including assistance with improvements to the voter registration system, training, public outreach, operations, coordination, electoral security, procurement, and logistics, as well as COVID-19 mitigation measures. 3, institutional capacity building, and 4, support to coordination of international assistance.
Follow up. Can I?
Yes, you can follow up, but there's not much left for me to say. Go ahead.
Yes. Mr. Abdul Hamid Dbeiba, the Prime Minister of the transitional government, had met with Yanukovych, I think yesterday in Geneva. Do you have any information what has been discussed?
On that, I do not. Michelle Nichols.
Hi, Steph. Thanks. There's a case that's getting headlines here in the States at the moment. The state of Oklahoma is set to execute a man this afternoon. Would the Secretary General like to comment or remind us of his policy on the death penalty? Thanks.
The Secretary General's position on against the imposition of the death penalty has been stated many times and will continue to be underscored. He has also urged all member states to abide by the moratorium on capital punishment and the progressive abolition of the death penalty. Okay, I don't see any more questions. One more, Celia.
Yes, we were thinking when we the NGOs will come back on January 3rd. What about the
You should
Greenpeace?
check with my colleagues in Malu, but I think you're seeing a progressive reopening, and I think there is a case-by-case. I mean, if you have people who are Greenpeace who need to come back in the building, our colleagues in Malu, I'm sure, will take care of it. Mr. Bays.
A couple more for you. The Secretary General has been tweeting about ending statelessness. Having a nationality is not a privilege, it's a human right. Why does he think this issue is so important?
Because if you are stateless, you are outside, all too often outside of the legal framework. You don't have access, it is difficult to get access to basic services. And it has a clear impact on your ability to live freely and openly where you would want to live.
So the UK is a country where already they can strip you of your nationality. They have the powers. There's new legislation going through that hasn't yet been passed by Parliament, that's being proposed by the government, which they would be able to strip you of your nationality without giving you notice beforehand if it was in the interests of national security or diplomatic relations. One assumes then, given this campaign, the Secretary General condemns that legislation.
We are not in the habit of commenting on legislation that has not yet been passed, but the Secretary General's position, as expressed by him in the tweet you read out, I think could not be clearer.
And one more, which is about the building. The building remains very empty. I mean, just remind us what staff are supposed to now be back at work.
Staff
and are the staff that the Secretary General expects to be back at work, have they turned back up, or are they not here? Because we all have to be COVID safe, but it just seems deserted around here.
As of, I think it was November 15th, staff could do a maximum of 3 days a week working from home, 2 days a week, and 2 days a week at the office minimum. We understand that there has to be, that certain people have specific circumstances due to family or childcare issues, but that is the current policy.
And could you, maybe not today, but give us some statistics for how many people are coming into the building compared with pre-pandemic, and also maybe, it's very hard, that 2 days a week thing, the metric on that. Could you tell us how far below that being met you are at the moment, in terms of the numbers, if you see what I mean? Because you clearly aren't meeting that at the moment.
Thank you. Tomorrow is Friday. Yeah. I hope to see you all here tomorrow. Ray, sorry, go ahead.
Stefan, is there any update regarding the meeting of the Credential Committee? They were supposed to meet on November.
Yes, they will meet. They will meet in November. One of the weeks in November, which sounds like an obvious answer. I just cannot remember off the top of my head. However, it will be. I would encourage you to look in the journal since it will be an official meeting. It will be in. It's expected the week. Sorry, expected the week of the 29th of November. But check the journal. Abdelhamid, you have one question.
Yes, Stefan, regarding the meeting of the Quartet in Norway, who called for that meeting? I thought it was intended for fundraising for the rebuilding of the infrastructure in Gaza and other.
All the envoys were.
Of the Palestinian people. So what happened exactly?
All of the envoys were present at the ad hoc liaison committee, which aims, as you well know, to deal with the economic Palestinian Palestine. So at that point, on the sidelines of that meeting, the envoys decided to meet as the quartet, which they did. Merci, shukran, hasta luego.